Okay, now let's talk a little bit about how to design an experiment. This is going to be something that as you go on to graduate school, as you go into industry, as you go on with your careers, if you're interested in science at all, you're going to be doing on a regular basis. And for anybody who has never done this before, it can be very daunting. Trying to figure out what the heck are you supposed to study? The whole world is out there, right? So, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how to do that. And this should help you because this semester you do need to run your own experiment that for possible publication. So keep that in mind. This is what I've learned to do over the years. Now let's think about science for a minute. All it really is the exploration of the natural world, right? So you've taken all these courses, you've done all these things where you've learned about biology and chemistry and physics and math and all manner of stuff. All science is a way for us to understand what is going on around us. So just keep that in mind. When we do a scientific experiment, what we are doing is we are looking for an answer. So you have to ask a question first. And in order to ask a question, you need to make an observation. So starting out with science is always about just observing the world around you. And these scientific experiments don't have to be these massive projects that, encompass everything you see or change the world as we know it or things like that. That's not how science works. In fact, we want to have as many scientists as possible of all levels, from the most basic beginning scientists to the ones that, are winning Nobel Prizes. We want them constantly working. And so now you're a part of that. So it doesn't matter if you have done science before, if you've taken 1,000,001 courses or not, maybe your major isn't even in science or hasn't been for very long. That is perfectly fine. In fact, I've found that people who haven't taken a lot of courses can come up with some of the more interesting questions simply because they haven't been told that that's not a question to have. So the first thing that I want you to do when you're talking about how to design your own experiment or thinking about what you want to research is to get rid of those mental blocks of, well, somebody's already looked at biology. That's the answer. Or somebody has obviously already answered this, so I'm not going to worry about it. I want to start out with taking a notebook, and I keep notebooks like this. These books that you see here on your module pages, this is actually my preferred notebook. It's a maker's book. It's got nice graph paper and stuff in it. There's a little envelope for stickers in the back. I just love it. And so I use this one on a regular basis. I have these all over the place in my office, at home, in my lab, everywhere. And I keep one in the car because that seems to be where I, sort of let my mind wander enough. And you want to start out with just observing the world around you. And as you start making those observations, you do a mindful observation type of system. And you're going to naturally start asking questions about it. And when you come up with those questions, then you write them down. Now, these questions may be things that you never look into again, or they may be things that suddenly create your entire career. That's the beauty of having this. So find the places where you just let your mind wander and you just start looking at things, because all science starts with observation. You want to go out and notice something. Okay, now, where to get these observations? That tends to be the next question. It's like, yeah, I've just walked around, I guess. I don't know. What am I observing? What's going on? So you can just go outside or start wandering around or whatever else and just start looking at stuff and start wondering about things, right? And that's how most of these old school biological questions have come up. I noticed that the sun rises every day. Does it always rise in the east? Does it always rise in the west? What's going on there? How often does that happen? Why does it do that? And that's basically where you're trying to go for. Take an observation and then start asking questions about it. However, if you just wander outside, that can lead to you just being completely paralyzed with too many things, too many observations. There's too much going on. So here is my first tip or trick. Start reading, start watching videos, and just start looking at random things and have this notebook next to you. And when you notice something, write it down. Where I like to look, if I am looking for, say, I want to do an entomology project or something like that. So I'll start with narrowing it down a little bit instead of going, I want to know everything. Start going, I want to do something with bugs. Okay. Or I want to do something with forensics, or I want to do something with plants. So start narrowing it down to that. Then I want to use all of the tools at my disposal. And when I say tools, I mean not just going outside necessarily, because you can very easily go in your backyard or go to a park or something and just start writing down everything you see and then asking questions about it. Or, and this helps quite a bit, is you can start doing internet searches or watching YouTube or TikToks or whatever else, and start thinking about what you see on there. My favorite way of figuring something out is to start out with that narrow category. Let's say entomology. I want to do an entomology project. Great. Okay. And then I like to look into things like old wives' tales or rumors or methods that people pass from person to person. Because this is something that I've noticed in the world in general. Humans are really good at observing stuff, right? So we do a lot of these things. We're also super good at trying to come up with reasons for it working. Have you ever talked to, I don't know, literally anybody, and you can ask them a question about something, or they'll tell you a little fact about something and just be like, this is why it happens. Now, they don't necessarily have any literature for you. They don't actually have any experiments that have been run, but they know it happens. That's just the way it is. Yeah, that happens all the time. In fact, you could probably think through your own brain and think of things that you've noticed that you've then explained to yourself. Without taking a class, without reading anything, you've just come up with the answer. Yep, that sounds right. We're really, really good at that. This has happened throughout history. And a lot of the knowledge, so to speak, that we've passed down in the form of old wives' tales or in the form of myths and legends and stories are based on initial observations and the human condition or the human way of trying to explain those observations away. Interesting. So when I want to do a very simple experiment, what I do is I start looking into old wives' tales, or I start looking into historical stories or things of that nature. So just to give you an idea of how I usually do it, so I can literally do a Google search for old wives' tales and insects. So that's what I've done here. And you come up with a whole bunch of these just things on Google. Super easy. And let's say this one. Here's some strange superstitions about stuff. You can read about little messengers and whatever else. Or for the simplest things, how to get rid of pests. Now, this is the type of thing that is actually pretty common, right? You ask somebody or you say, oh, hey, I've got fire ants or I've got cockroaches or whatever. How do I get rid of them? Somebody will have that answer and they'll say, oh, you need to pour grits on their mound. Or I've seen this a lot just from moving here is people will use mothballs to keep ants out. I'd never seen that when I lived back in California, but it's all over the place here. Nobody knows where that came from. Nobody knows that I've talked to if it even works or okay, they say that it works. They're just people who do it are hardcore about it. But so I like doing Google searches like this. Like, tell me how to get rid of something, or tell me about why these things do this thing. Okay, so let's say we do here. Let's see, sprinkle grits on your counter to keep ants away. Okay, that's an interesting thing. Now, this one says fiction. This myth may sound like something, but it won't work. However, notice there's no citations or anything here. So this is, again, just somebody saying nuh-uh without actually backing it up. And if you go through that literature search lesson I gave, you'll find that the whole point of citations and literature and everything like that is to support your argument and kind of give you a shield. When someone says, "Nuh-uh," you say, "Actually, here's the experiment that did it." So if you're trying to come up with an experiment, you can test this. So think about something like this: sprinkle grits on your computer to keep on your counter to keep ants away. So somebody obviously observed that there were ants, and then maybe they spilled grits, and maybe the ants didn't cross it. Straight observation, right? So you can go from that simple observation to a question. And the question in this case would be, does sprinkling grits on your counter keep ants away? Yay or nay? Now you have your scientific experiment, don't you? That's as simple as it gets. So pest control is a really easy way to come up with an experiment like this. So in this case, once you have this little old wives' tale, and I usually point everybody towards old wives' tales simply because they are this simple. It's things like how to get rid of flies, how to get rid of ants. This is how to repel things. This is how to kill things. This is how to attract other things. Pretty straightforward, which can easily lead to a question. So once you make this observation, then you ask the question, and you want your question to be as simple as physically possible. You don't want something that has like 20 different parts going into it or something of that nature. So in this case, I'm reading, you can sprinkle grits on your counter to keep ants away. This particular website says it's fiction. I've noticed that there's no references here, which always leads me to believe they don't actually know. They're just saying things. So now I can test that. So my question is, will sprinkling grits on my counter keep ants away? So then I can move into designing this experiment. That's a really simplistic question. That's what you want for a lot of these projects. The more complex your project is, the longer it's going to take, and the less likely it is you're actually going to come up with a firm answer. Okay, so in this case, I've got the question. Then, because I'm a scientist, I'm going to go look up the answer to see if somebody's already figured it out or not. And I want actual primary literature in order to give myself an answer. Maybe somebody's already tested this and they've gone through it. Cool. If they have and they've published that paper, I can then read it, and I can read it the exact way that I peer review all these papers. So you're going to get a lot of practice in peer reviewing. You're going to start reading and be able to kind of in the back of your mind constantly peer review these papers and go through like, yeah, that was a well-designed experiment. I don't see any flaws with it. Or you might read it, and this happens all the time, and you find an experiment and you're like, wow, that didn't actually answer the question. You said we were testing if grits on the counter would keep ants away, but instead you tested to see if dumping grits on an ant mound killed them. Two different questions. Okay, so they didn't really answer it. So you go look up the answer, and if somebody's already done it, great. If they haven't, now you've got your question. Now, if somebody has already done it, what's beautiful about science is usually when you're answering a question, 10 more questions will pop up while you're doing it. So something as simple as this, does grits on your counter keep ants away? Maybe they found that ants are actually attracted. Then you could ask, are they more attracted to grits or something else? Or what was it that actually made people think this worked? Maybe ants don't like walking over the grits. And there was something mentioned about that in the paper. And you go, okay, so if they don't like walking over grits, I wonder if it's the texture or the actual chemical makeup of those grits that keep them from walking over it. That's another question now, right? And so this tends to happen. So as you're reading a paper, even if you find the answer to your particular question, you'll find, hey, I had another couple questions. That's when you jump into that notebook and write a few more down. Like, is it the texture that keeps them away? So that's a pretty simple one to test too, isn't it? You got this texture of grits. What if you have 5 different things like sand and tiny rocks and other stuff that are the approximate same texture? Maybe we can test all those and keep those away. And then that can lead you to something else, and it leads you to something else. So this is probably the most simplistic way to do it. You can either start with a Google search, or better yet, you can do things like watching TikTok. So this is a really nice medium. And I've actually worked with a lot of students over the past couple of years that have been watching TikToks like this and have thought, is that real? What is going on? So this is one that was really popular this summer. And I actually had somebody, you might be able to read the paper if it gets assigned to you, who was reading it. This is where people were putting store-bought strawberries into salt water And they were saying bugs are coming out. And so my student went, I don't know if this is true or not. I said, okay, test it. So they did. And what they found was they actually tested store-bought ones and they tested organic ones. And then they had a friend who was growing strawberries. So they also tested some that were growing in the backyard. And they found that some, especially the organic ones, did have those little maggots in them. Those are actually fruit fly maggots. Very, very common to have fruit fly maggots in fresh fruit like that in especially organic types of fruits. And so it's very common in the organic fruit, even more common in the stuff that was in somebody's backyard. But in the store-bought stuff that had pesticides on it, they didn't. Oh, that's a pretty straightforward thing. And then now that we have that answer, then the next question could be things like, well, what exactly is this species? And why do we see it more in backyard and organic versus store-bought? And what are the store-bought pesticides that are being used, and are those safe? It just sort of builds upon each other. So what I like about using a really short video version like TikTok is you can go through a whole bunch of videos very, very, very quickly. You can also do the same thing on YouTube here. You can do it on whatever other microblogging site. Twitter is a great place for this sort of thing. It's just a bunch of people making simple observations or saying things like they're fact when they don't necessarily have it. So what I want you to do is to start writing down things that you've noticed. Choose your area that you want to investigate. Doesn't have to be entomology if you don't want it to be, but I would do something where it can support your future career. If you want to go on and be an entomologist, do something in entomology. Do you want to go on and do forensics? Do something in forensics. If you want to do some other subject, do that as well. And then start just watching videos, reading articles, making observations, and writing down your questions that have come up with it. Okay, so I sometimes put up, or I sometimes talk about in some of these videos, some interesting questions, but you can also go through some of these previously published papers or the papers that you are actually peer reviewing. And as you go through the peer reviews, it might just sort of spark a question in the back of your mind. Try to pay attention to those things. So then once you have your question, you are going to move on and start designing the experiment. So you want to narrow down that question to as simple a question as possible. And then you want to really think through step by step, how would you test this sort of thing? So for something like these strawberries in saltwater, we watched this 35-second video and went, okay, that should be pretty easy to test. Let's see if it actually happens. And then the student went through and thought, okay, well, we can see it actually happening right here. This is an observation. So then the question actually became, she bought it from the store. Let's test these other three things. And then we went through and said, if we're testing three things, how do we want to do it step by step? Step 1, buy the strawberries. Step 2, put them in salt water. Step 3, leave them for this amount of time. Step 4, see if any maggots came out. Step 5, count those maggots. And there you go. So that can take a little bit of time to try to figure out step by step how you're going to do it. But if you really just sit down and think it through. Okay, so a bunch of things like this can actually help. So sprinkling grits, super easy to test. Using bay leaves to keep pests away. Put a penny in a bag of water to get rid of mosquitoes and flies. Use vinegar to attract fruit flies. Spray peppermint oil on spider webs to get rid of spiders. That's interesting. Okay, that sort of thing. So that's how you come up with and design basically an experiment. Now, here's a little bit of help for you while you design these things. The first couple of times you start doing this, it may seem overwhelming, and you may find that it is completely like things just don't work. That's okay. Think about science like you're just playing around. That's why I love it so much is, I get to read these sort of things and then just sort of play around with them and be like, I wonder if that works. Let's try it. Okay. And see what happens. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. This is something we call a pilot study. So back to, say, the strawberry things. What this student and I did right at the beginning was we're like, okay, let's try it real quick. and we threw in some strawberries and just watched to see what would happen. And with the store-bought ones, nothing happened. We went, that's weird. Wonder why. That's a new question. Move along. So pilot studies, that whenever you see that written in a paper, that means that somebody tried something and it didn't necessarily work, or they tried it 5 or 6 different ways and went, this is the one that works. That's how I'm going to do my methods. Whenever you see a pilot study, that's usually a bunch of extra work of somebody just playing around in the lab or in their kitchen or whatever, trying out things to see what's going to work for the materials and methods. Once they find out what works, that's what they wrote down. So it's just sort of code. So another place that I like to do my research is I use these RSS feeders. So RSS is a very simple way of scraping through websites, basically, and finding information. So this is my RSS feed from Reddit. I've got a bunch of different science things and gossip and whatever else you can do. So this is one, Sci Combinator. Sci Combinator is a neat website where people go on and vote on interesting scientific stuff. And so it's just a list of interesting scientific things. So I read this every day and see what's going on in the science world. I also go on to Reddit, where people just post a bunch of stuff. They post about information that they find. I read through this. This is a really fast way of reading through a bunch of different current events or facts or things that are happening. And it's just different people blogging about it or writing about it or whatever else. And you can just go through it really quickly, read some things. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. And then pretty much every day I will see something like, that's an interesting thing. One of the more recent ones was the CDC found out that one of the Victoria's Secret perfumes, I think it's called Bombshell, it actually repels mosquitoes. And it was just a simple thing on Sci Combinator that I read, and I went, that's interesting. And then I started thinking about it for a minute, and I thought, I wonder what that smells like, one. And two, I've heard that a couple of other things like Avon Skin So Soft also repels mosquitoes. Wonder what it is about those things. I wonder if there's other perfumes that do that. Now, can you think of a way that we could test that? Perhaps. Because I can. And it is something that would be pretty straightforward, right? What if you just sprayed yourself down with these different perfumes and went outside to see if they repelled mosquitoes or not? And you could try it over and over again over a series of days, or better yet, you can get some friends or family members involved and everybody wears a different perfume and one person wears nothing, and you just randomly put that out there. So this is what I mean by coming up with an experiment with a question. So what I want you to do is start looking into your resources, walk outside, start letting your mind wander, start reading just random things, writing down these questions as you get them, and then that is where you're going to get your experiment from. Now, if you need some help really narrowing stuff down, feel free to drop in and talk to me. I am happy to help you, and you can take care of that. All right. Let me know if you have any questions.